afternoon. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar, the second in the Teacher Effectiveness Series. Today's webinar is on professional development models and is being hosted by the Regional Educational Laboratory of the Mid-Atlantic. I'm Elizabeth Greniger, and I'll be facilitating today's webinar. Now it's my pleasure to introduce to you today's presenter. Dr. Hilda Borko is a professor at the Stanford University Graduate School of Education. Her research interests include professional and staff development, classroom instruction, mathematical problem solving, mathematics education, teacher knowledge, teacher community, and teacher education. At present, Hilda is one of the principal investigators of an NSF-funded study that explores the impact of a professional development program for middle school math teachers. At this time, I'll turn it over to Hilda.
Hi, welcome everybody. In today's webinar, I'll make a case for the importance of teacher professional development that is effective, scalable, and sustainable. Such professional development is more important than ever in this time when the Common Core state standards are being implemented and the new generation science standards are not far behind. Because of the standards, teachers will need to learn new skills and strategies to teach to the standards, particularly the ELA, math, and science practices. I'm going to consider what we know about the characteristics of professional development that meet these criteria of being effective, scalable, and sustainable, and then I'll share an example from my own work, the project that Elizabeth mentioned. Before I begin the presentation, we'd like you to answer a poll. This will give us a better sense of who's in the audience. You'll see a pop-up box come onto your screen with multiple choice questions. You should click one of the choices to indicate your professional role. I'm yelling. Tell her I'm yelling.
Okay. Okay. See what I'm talking about?
You're fine.
That's. Other school level administrators. That means district.
That's right.
Where are district levels?
Should I talk now?
Oh, yeah.
They're just taking them.
Whatever it is, it's low, right? They're still tabulating. Yeah. Are we on there? Yep, we put teachers.
Okay. Well, it looks like we have a very diverse audience today. Let's get started with the presentation. During the course of this webinar, I'll be addressing these three broad questions. What are effective, high-quality professional development programs for teachers? How can districts and schools develop coherent, high-quality teacher professional development? And what evidence is there to support programs that are considered effective and high quality? There have been major efforts in the U.S. and some other countries to improve the quality of teaching. These efforts have led in part to a focus on providing high-quality professional opportunities, development opportunities for all teachers. There's a number of reasons for this. One is the U.S. performance on international comparisons, such as the highly visible PISA result. And more recently, our reform efforts such as No Child Left Behind and Race to the Top, both of which include requirements for a highly qualified teacher in every classroom. The quote on the first slide, Never before in the history of education has greater importance been attached to the professional development of educators, was written by Tom Guskey in his book, Evaluating Professional Development. If anything, this statement is even more true now than when his book was published in the year 2000. This second quote is a statement included in the introductory section of a chapter that I wrote with my colleagues Jennifer Jacobs and Karen Kellner for the International Encyclopedia of Education. If we want schools to offer more powerful learning opportunities for students, we must offer more powerful learning opportunities for teachers, opportunities that are grounded in a conception of learning to teach as a lifelong endeavor. The Common Core state standards provide additional pressure for reform and an increased focus on professional development. With the Common Core standards implementation currently underway, states and districts are feeling the need to prepare teachers who can teach to the standards. So everyone seems to be getting into the picture. We have state departments of education, we have publishing companies, we even have new dedicated organizations such as All Things Common Core. And my favorite, even Google News web feeds, which, by the way, I did not put on my homepage. When we were invited to write an article on effective professional development, we reviewed and synthesized a vast amount of literature. Our synthesis brought us to conclude that there are two major areas we have to think about with professional development. The first area is the content. And what we learned from the research is that professional development must be situated in the practice of teaching. In other words, learning experiences must address problems of practice and be grounded in the teacher's own practice. Second, we need to pay attention to the process and structure characteristics. Professional development must model preferred instructional practices so that teachers can experience those practices and then reflect on the effectiveness based on their personal experience. Second, professional development must involve active teacher learning, which is, as many of you probably know, very different from the standard kind of professional development where a lecture is given from an outside expert. Third, professional development must take place in professional learning communities. Now, the notion of learning communities is probably one of the most overused terms these days, but yet the notion of the central theme of collaboration among teachers when they're learning new things is an important one. Professional development settings must be appropriate to the goals of professional development, so often that means that they're school-based or bringing the classroom into the professional development setting. And we'll talk about some ways that that can be done. And finally, professional development must be ongoing and sustainable over time. About the same time as we were writing our chapter, Professor Laura Desimone was writing an article for Educational Researcher that also considered what the research says about effective professional development. She suggested an agenda for research to move us forward. And this quote is one of her conclusions about the state of the field. Given the number, quality, and diversity of studies that provide support for these features, I conclude that we have reached a consensus that these core features play an important role in determining the effectiveness of professional development, that they are the features of PD worth testing. The features that she identified are very similar to the ones that my colleagues Karen and Jennifer and I identified in our International Handbook chapter. However, these consensus core features are very general, and they don't really provide much guidance to either people designing professional development or people from states and districts who are trying to select professional development programs. So we're left with the question, what do they really look like in practice? And that's a question that my colleagues and I have been involved in exploring for the last 10 years. With colleagues Jennifer Jacob and Karen Kellner, I've been doing a PD and research project that had two major components. The first was develop a model of professional development, which we refer to as the problem-solving cycle. After developing the model, we began to explore its scalability and sustainability. When we began this project, all of us were located at the University of Colorado, but as you can see from the logos at the bottom of the slide, we're now at 3 different universities: Jennifer at University of Colorado, Karen at Hunter, and myself at Stanford. We continue to work together remotely, and we're currently actually writing a book about the project. During that project, we received the support and assistance of many graduate students. The ones who are listed on this slide are the students currently working on the analysis of professional development facilitation with me at Stanford. We were also fortunate to have the support of 2 grants from the National Science Foundation. So what I'm going to do in the remainder of today's talk is describe both the problem-solving cycle model and the model we developed for preparing leaders of the problem-solving cycle. Then discuss how the PSC and the leader preparation model can serve as a guide for districts and schools looking to develop their own coherent quality professional development programs. So as I said, in the first phase of our work, we conducted a series of design experiments to develop and refine the professional development model. We call the model we developed the problem-solving cycle. At its core, it's a series of workshops focused on enhancing teachers' knowledge of mathematics for teaching and their instructional practices. And we call it a cycle because it's meant to be iterative and used over and over again. This is the graphic representation for the model. I'm going to walk you quickly through it, and then we'll be spending some time looking at each of the different components. The focus of our professional development is on teaching with problems. There are analogs in other content areas, such as science inquiry or using original texts in history. In our model, we place equal emphasis on the mathematics, on understanding and building on student thinking, and on instructional practices for teaching with problems. We also use video, which plays a central role in our workshops. And I had mentioned earlier the notion of bringing the classroom into professional development. One of the ways that we do that is by bringing videos of the teachers' classrooms into the professional development workshops. In thinking about the problem-solving cycle and other professional development models, for example, when making decisions about the appropriateness of a particular model for a specific district or school or other PD settings, it's helpful to think about the extent to which the model is adaptive versus specified. Each has its advantages and drawbacks. The figure that you see here was developed by Karen Kellner and also by Nanette Sego, who is a person who's developed several very highly specified professional development models. The 2 endpoints are highly specified and highly adaptive. Our problem-solving cycle is considered an adaptive model, and I'll talk a little bit about that in a second. Highly specified models usually involve published materials, explicit goals and principles, professional development tasks, facilitator supports, and resources that are very well laid out and detailed. So the professional development might address specific content, include specific activities such as math problems or science investigations for the teachers to complete, all of the materials needed for those activities, and specific guidelines for the professional development leaders. In contrast, a professional development model that's adaptive, such as the problem-solving cycle, has flexibility in both content and structure. In our model, the facilitator selects the content to be covered and which instructional practices or aspects of student thinking to focus on. So in our first project, the focus was on algebraic reasoning. In our second, it was on ratio and proportion. And all of the tasks that we would select to work on in those projects focused on the particular mathematical domain. Adaptive PD is also flexible with respect to structure. So the use of video, we would use video that's selected from the participants' own classrooms, and we can use it as we wish to bring the classrooms into the professional development. Workshops can also be modified to fit the blocks of times that are available for professional development in a particular school or district. And decisions about both content and structure take into account the changing needs and interests of the participants.
Thank you so much, Hilda, for sharing that research background on the importance of professional development with our participants. And it was also really great to start to hear about the foundations of the problem-solving cycle model. Now we want to open it up to all of the participants to start thinking a little bit about applying what you've heard to your own practice. So at this time, you'll see a question on your screen. We want you to start thinking about the professional development sessions that you've attended in the past that you've considered to be successful and effective. You'll see a pop-up box come onto your screen, and we'd like you to answer, in your opinion, what are 1 to 2 elements that have made this professional development effective? Seeing job embedded, the use of technology, reflection, active, participatory, a lot of words that signify engagement, that the PD participants can be engaged in what they're learning. Tools to address a problem, clearly applicable to the job, related to practice, flexibility, which is a key component that Hilda had just discussed, emphasizing community and working together. So a lot about collaboration, a lot about being engaged with what's actually happening in the classroom. So a really close connection between the professional development and the practice. Making it ongoing and ensuring that the professional development is not a one-stop session, that it sustains over time. Hilda, it looks like our participants have really come up with some good points about the professional development that they have been engaged in up to this point, and I hope that the remainder of our session today will give them a lot of other ideas about how to expand on the effective professional development they've experienced in the past.
I think that it will, and I think that a lot of the points that they brought up as effective elements of professional development are things that you'll be hearing about today as I talk more about the problem-solving cycle. So now let's see what the problem-solving cycle looks like in practice. Let me start with Phase 1, which consists of 2 components, Workshop 1 and the PSC lesson. In Workshop 1, teachers work in small groups to solve the problem-solving cycle task. They share solution strategies and pedagogical ideas with the whole group, focusing on multiple solution strategies, multiple representations, such as tables, graphs, manipulatives, mathematical expressions, and then they work individually or in small groups to create a lesson incorporating the problem in a way that would be appropriate for their own students. The next step is the actual lesson itself. Each teacher who's participating in the workshop conducts a lesson with the problem in one of her or his classrooms, and the lessons are videotaped. I know this probably looks overwhelming. This is an example of the type of rich problem that we've used. It's called Snakes and Snakewood. Take a couple of minutes just to read through it and see what it's asking students to do, so you're familiar with it as I use it as an example to illustrate components of the problem-solving cycle. There's no need to work on solving it. Let me just point out to you why we consider this problem a rich problem. There are multiple ways to solve it. It can be solved with pictures, tables, or manipulatives, and it's accessible to students at a variety of age levels and mathematical proficiency. In other words, for middle school students, which is the group that we've been working with, students of a variety of levels of mathematical proficiency will be able to get started and answer at least the first couple of questions. Now let's look at some examples of solutions that were generated by teachers in one of the workshops that used snakes and snakewood. One of the facilitators who we worked with in phase 2 of our project divided the teachers in his workshop into 3 groups and assigned each group to solve the problem using a different representation. So one group was asked to use pictures or drawings, another group manipulatives, and a third group a numerical expression. He had each group create a poster depicting their solution and the pros and cons of their solution strategies. So this first poster is the poster that the group who started with pictures created. They started by drawing the first stage of the snake's growth. Then they described the pattern in words. Notice that they didn't get to the point of developing a mathematical expression. Notice also what they highlighted as pros and cons. The second group was asked to solve the problem using manipulatives. And in this case, they were given snap cubes, 1-inch cubes that all snap together of different colors. As you can see in the poster, the group decided to record the results of each stage as they grew the snake by filling in the table. They did attempt to write an expression for the total number of rings. And note, they identified a different set of pros and cons. And finally, the numerical example. As you can see, this group also decided to construct a table. In contrast to group 2, however, they began with the table. They also got further than the other 2 groups, writing an expression for the total number of rings, the number of white rings, and the number of black rings. And again, note the pros and cons that they identified. So what we would do in a workshop like this, each of the groups would solve the problem in the way that they solved it. Then we would have them post their solutions somewhere in the room and discuss the affordances and constraints of the different representations and solution strategies. So now that you've seen an example of middle school mathematics, think about what type of activity you would do in your own workshop in mathematics or in another subject area.
So I see Catherine likes manipulatives, just like in the Snakes and Snakewood PD. Gallery walks. Jared uses gallery walks. That's definitely a strategy that can be used across content areas. I know that others of you have a lot of good ideas to share about what you do in your own professional development, so keep them coming in. So a lot of teamwork and engaging with one another to solve problems. Charting and gallery walks, another comment for gallery walks. Providing feedback on one another's work.
So I'm noticing that a lot of really good ideas. In fact, some of them I think we'll take back to our own group as we continue working on the professional development. For example, the sticky notes that people would put on each of the posters. I'm also seeing some ideas that relate not just to mathematics, but to other subject areas as well. So now that you've thought about how you might use something like Workshop 1, let's go on and look at the other workshops. In the problem-solving cycle, the second workshop is focused primarily on deepening teachers' understanding of students' thinking, helping them to do things like anticipate student errors and common misconceptions, interpret students' incomplete thinking, and predict what students will find interesting or challenging. We do this to a large extent by examining students' reasoning using artifacts such as video clips from the teacher's lessons or students' written work to situate the discussion in the teacher's classroom practice. So what you see here in the photograph on the left is a still shot from a clip of about 3 to 4 minutes that a professional development leader showed in Workshop 2. It's a group of students in one class working on a different problem. This one is the skyscraper windows problem. One of them has solved the problem in a way that the other 3 didn't understand, and he's trying to explain it to them. In the photo on the right, you see a background with a whiteboard where the teachers have actually been working on solutions to a problem. And in the foreground, the teachers are discussing their solutions. This was an occasion in which the PD leader selected a clip in which students were using a solution strategy the teachers hadn't considered in Workshop 1. Therefore, the teachers decided to solve the problem using this group's solution strategy in order to try to unpack their mathematical reasoning. Solving the problem led to an extensive discussion about the mathematics in the problem. Now in Workshop 3, the focus is primarily on instructional practices that the teacher would use in problem-based teaching. For example, how teachers adapt a task for their students, how they break it down to scaffold student learning, how teachers can pose questions to elicit and extend student thinking, and to help them understand their own students' thinking. Again, artifacts of practice play a key role. So typically we would use video clips from the lessons of the teachers as they taught the problem. In the photo on the left here, you see an example of student work on the skyscraper windows problem. Again, this is a photo from a video clip. This time, a portion of a lesson in which the teacher was talking one-on-one with the student. Peter, the teacher, asked Caitlin a series of questions, probing for her to explain her method of solving the problem. In this particular episode, he was dissatisfied with his questioning. He felt that he was trying to lead the student toward his approach rather than trying to understand hers. And I'm sure a lot of you can imagine what that conversation might look like. In the photo on the right, the teachers are discussing the video clip after watching it several times. In particular, they're focusing on the types of questions that might be better suited to helping the teacher understand the student's thinking.
So as you can all see, video really plays a major role in this model. And so now I'd like you to just take a minute and think about how would you use video if you're not currently doing it already? How would you use video in your work with teachers? Again, you'll see a pop-up box, and we'd like you to let us know either how you are doing it or how you would like to use video. Peter mentions that video can help to investigate student thinking. I think it can help teachers dive into the processes that students go through as they're investigating a problem in the classroom. Along the same lines, collaborative reflection of student thinking, so allowing teachers to really get into what students are saying and doing in the classroom. Linda mentions that not only looking at what the students are doing, but really using the video to look at what teachers are doing and look at the ways that they're engaging their students. Diana mentions that video is used for self-reflection with career and tech ed teachers, giving them an opportunity to watch their own teaching and think reflectively about what their practice is demonstrating. I like what Hillary mentions about the videos making the conversations very grounded and concrete. It's very based in fact. You know, teachers are able to really look at something that has happened and remember it accurately and discuss it on a factual basis. Hilda, I think that the participants have come up with some really great uses of video, and it sounds like people are using it in their practice and maybe have gotten some new ideas from your work, and it sounds hopefully like they're offering some ideas that you can use with your work as well.
One of the comments that I noticed is Barbara's about the difficulty of having time to process a 3-minute clip within time limits of the PD. This is one of the comments that our facilitators make that they're often surprised about. Their initial thought is, how am I going to just use a 3-minute clip and have something to talk about for an hour-long professional development? And they find the same experience that Barbara's talking about. There's just a lot that you can learn from watching closely and really talking about 3 minutes, whether it be student thinking or teacher leading a small group discussion or closure at the end of a lesson.
Lots of great responses still coming in, you know, a lot about reflection and teacher questioning.
So Catherine talks about helping students who are insecure. It's interesting, you can also work with teachers who are not quite comfortable with some of their own practices. Now, the last one I showed you where the teacher didn't like his questioning strategies, that's a clip that we didn't use until we had been working with this particular group of teachers for about a year. So we knew that they had a really strong sense of community and that they felt for themselves errors are okay and teaching isn't perfect.
That's great. I think that's a great segue into wrapping up this section, and knowing that teaching is not perfect, our students are not perfect, and we as teachers and professional development leaders will all face challenges, but being really prepared with the strategies that we're going to use to present professional development will allow us to be more effective at that. So just to summarize what we've shared so far, what Hilda's shared so far, there's several principles that underlie the problem-solving cycle framework. We've heard that it provides a common teaching experience. We've heard that it's situated in teachers' instruction through artifacts of practice. Primarily here we've heard about video clips. That there's a central role of the community in determining how and what people learn. It's long-term and ongoing so that it can be sustainable. And again, one of the hallmarks of this approach is that it's adaptive. It adapts to participants' needs and priorities. And you'll note that although this approach is really based on the math content area, there are several features that will really apply to all content areas.
Now shift gears and turn our attention to the second component of our project. And in this section of the webinar, I'd like to talk about our model for preparing professional development leaders. Keep in mind that one of the key principles of effective professional development is that it must be ongoing, scalable to different contexts, and sustainable over time. One of the key factors in addressing this goal is the ability to prepare professional development leaders in local contexts. In other words, the ability to build local capacity to conduct professional development. I'm going to give you a few seconds to read these quotes. The quotes are from a review of the research on preparation of mathematics teacher educators, both pre-service and in-service, by Ruhama Even. Although, as the quotes indicate, despite the need for local professional development leaders, as a community we have little research-based knowledge of either what teacher educators and PD leaders do or how to go about preparing them. And again, although Dr. Even is focusing on mathematics teachers and teacher educators, the same is certainly true for teaching and teacher education across content areas and grade levels. This is the problem that we worked on in the second phase of our research. In phase 2 of the project, which is nearing completion, we worked with middle schools in one district using a design research approach to test the effectiveness, scalability, and sustainability of our model. We asked 3 broad questions. Is the problem-solving cycle model of professional development effective in improving instructional practices and student learning? Can it be adapted to other contexts? And can it be successfully enacted by different PD leaders without the extra support of the research project? So the second project we called Implementing the Problem-Solving Cycle. It's a 5-year project funded by the National Science Foundation. The theory of action that guided the design of our project is shown in this figure. Basically, providing professional development for teacher leaders. This would increase their knowledge and skills for conducting professional development. They in turn would conduct professional development for teachers. The professional development, which is the problem-solving cycle in this case, is designed to increase teachers' knowledge and skills for teaching and help them improve the quality of their instruction. And with improved instruction, this would lead to improvements in student learning. Note that in this project we refer to the PD leaders as teacher leaders. That was actually a term that was identified by the district because it was a term that they were already using for people in similar roles. This slide depicts our model for working with teacher leaders, the teacher leader preparation model. The next few slides explain in detail some of the components of this model, but basically each year of support, at least during the initial phases of the model, begins with the Summer Leadership Academy. Then, during the academic year, there's 3 leadership support meetings during each problem-solving cycle. And I think I mentioned this earlier, each cycle is about a semester long. So ideally, teacher leaders participate in a Summer Leadership Academy prior to the beginning of each school year. This academy is particularly important during the initial years of building local capacity. Activities during the Summer Academy include preparing to teach the problems selected for the upcoming year. Typically what we would do is look at 3 or 4 problems and decide on which ones we wanted to focus on during the year. Then modeling of video-based discussions by the academy leaders, rehearsal of those discussions by the PD leaders, and the modeling and rehearsal would occur in mini cycles of the problem-solving cycle. If it's not the first year of the project, often going back to some of the videos that we had collected during the previous year. The purpose of the first leadership support meeting is to help the PD leaders prepare to lead the first problem-solving cycle workshop, which is the workshop on solving the problem and planning the lesson. So some of the things that they practice doing are conducting a workshop focused on the problem, drawing from their own experiences teaching it, helping the teachers explore multiple solution strategies and relationships among them, as we saw in the example with the 3 posters, and considering the difficulties that students might have and how to help the teachers think about those difficulties. One of the things that we suggest is that the PD leaders early in the semester actually teach the problem to their own students. Then during the first leadership support meeting, they can draw from their own experiences teaching the problem. In the second and third leadership support meetings, these would take place after the teachers in the group have taught the lesson in their own classrooms. The purpose of the leadership support meetings in this case is to identify the goals for the next workshop, to select video from the lessons that the teachers in their group have taught, and to plan discussions, which entails writing guiding questions and probing questions, and finally to rehearse those discussions. So what you see in the top picture is me working with a group of 2 leaders, helping them to select video that they would want to use in their upcoming workshop. And we're watching video from the teachers in their own group. And then the second one at the bottom, what you see is an example of these same 2 teacher leaders rehearsing the discussion that they would then use with the teachers, and they're rehearsing it with their peers, with the other teacher leaders in the program.
Thank you so much, Hilda, for sharing some more about how the teacher leaders are trained to deliver the professional development. I hope some of that resonates with the folks on the call today, that some of the techniques that you used are things that they're currently practicing or part of in their districts. But now we want to take a moment to hear from participants again. Given the context of your own school or district, how are PD leaders being trained and supported, and how could they be better trained and supported to use a model like this, like the problem-solving cycle or something similar in a different subject area? So you're going to once again see a pop-up box, and we'd like to hear from you about what training and support would help foster this type of a model. Okay, so I see in some places PD leaders may not be trained. We'll have to consider whether that is really an effective practice or lack thereof. So any training would be beneficial to people. I like the idea that Hilda mentioned, and I'm seeing Leslie's also mentioning, that it's really helpful if the PD leaders have the opportunity to teach the subject matter and to engage with students, whether it's in their own classroom or another classroom, to deliver the instruction that they're discussing in their PD sessions. Hilda, have you had any good experiences where those PD leaders are coming to different or maybe better conclusions because they've had the experience of teaching the content prior to delivering the PD?
Absolutely. It's much easier to conduct a workshop where you explore the nature of the mathematics in a task if you've already taught that task to your own students and learned what they saw as what were some of the potential pitfalls. So I think that that's central to the work that we do. We've noticed that it's really important. I see Jared's asking about issues of time. That's a really good question, Jared. We have had to work very closely with the schools and with the districts to try to get some release time for the principals. Because we had a grant for one of our projects, we were able to have them take use days of school, and we were able to provide subs. The districts that we've worked with had very strong unions, and because most of the professional development is done during the school year and the leader preparation is during the school year, they actually could not receive compensation. We were able, in some cases, to give them compensation for the Summer Leadership Academy because that's outside of the regular school time. Again, this is something that in my experience is going to be different in every single district, and it just has to be worked out at the district level and with the individual administrators at the buildings.
I see somewhat of a theme resonating through some of the comments that a lot of folks who are delivering PD may not have received training and are really having to develop their own practices for being PD leaders. And that's a really hard position to be in. Hilda, do you have any comments about that?
No, I agree that it's a really hard position to be in. Some of the teacher leaders who we were working with in the Colorado project had that same experience themselves, that they were department chairs, they were people who were running PD for the other teachers in the building without the preparation. We found that they really appreciated the opportunity to get together with other teacher leaders and work on what are some effective ways to run PD in our schools.
And I see Jared has another question related to technology and social networking and using those capabilities to stay connected between trainings. And I think that some places are definitely using technology to their advantage. But again, I think that that's very context-based, how much that's being used.
I think it depends a lot on the culture of the school and the culture of the district. I know that in our project in Colorado, we created an opportunity for social networking, and it wasn't really taken up very much at the beginning. However, by the end, as the teacher leaders developed more of a sense of community, they did engage more in social networking via the internet and a list we created for them. We've also been experimenting, and as yet not terribly successfully, with making videos available and having the ability for teacher leaders to look at video between the meetings and actually talk about the video and start to explore some of the ways that they would use the video in their professional development. I think that our ideas were a little bit ahead of the technological resources that we had available. But I also see that happening more and more.
I see, one of the main themes that comes across here and in some of the things you've already mentioned is that collaboration is key. So getting teachers working together and engaged in conversations about their practice and about their students is really critical to making professional development meaningful and impactful on what's happening in the classroom. And I think that you're going to be talking next about some of the data and the experiences that the teachers had in this project, and that will speak a bit to the effectiveness of this approach.
Right, that's exactly what I wanted to talk about next. So let's turn and look at some of the findings from our project. Of course, since we had a research project that was funded by National Science Foundation, we had both the opportunity and the requirement that we look at the effectiveness of what we were doing. So to determine whether the teacher leaders were able to successfully facilitate the workshops by the end of the project with the support that we provided, we analyzed videos of their last set of workshops. We looked at fidelity of implementation to key features of the problem-solving cycle. And today I'm just going to highlight a couple of them. I'm going to highlight the idea of workshop culture. Were they able to create a collaborative environment in which teachers were willing to explore teaching and learning together? Were they able to help the teachers gain in their specialized content knowledge, for example, their ability to use multiple representations and multiple solution strategies? And were they able to help teachers improve their pedagogical content knowledge, their questioning strategies, their ways to introduce a task, their ways to adapt tasks to their own learners? Let's first look at characteristics of workshop cultures. Based on our research, the teacher leaders were generally successful in establishing productive cultures within the workshops. They seem to have little difficulty establishing a climate of respect and promoting collaborative collegial working relationships with their groups. And it's interesting to keep in mind, I think it's important to keep in mind that we had teacher leaders, some of whom were already experienced conducting professional development, some of whom were not, some of whom were department chairs, others of whom were not, and all of them were able to develop a really nice climate of respect and collaborative working relationships. Now, one reason for that is probably that we paid explicit attention to building community and to establishing norms in our workshops, in the leadership preparation meetings. We talked a lot about norms for watching video, norms for discussing video, the importance of describing, the importance of analyzing and not evaluating. The ratings of participants' willingness to share ideas and take intellectual risks were a little bit lower than the ratings on the other dimensions of workshop culture. And we think that's because this aspect of community is more challenging to develop and takes a little bit more time to establish. These are quotes from our interviews with the teacher leaders at the end of the project. So Kyla said, in the beginning we had our group of teachers that tended to speak up and share their ideas. We messed around with the grouping a bit as we went through the year, trying to find out which mix was best for getting everyone to share. And Jason, who actually co-facilitated with her, said, we've always been a group that doesn't like to share in a big group setting. This year we actually broke down those barriers, and now we're more open about discussing things. So this is an indication of the fact that the teacher leaders did pay explicit attention to developing community, and that by and large they felt successful. So the next feature I want to look at is specialized content knowledge. For this feature, we looked at teacher leaders' abilities to help teachers develop the mathematical knowledge that they needed to teach the lesson with the problem-solving cycle problem. And we asked the question, to what extent did the teacher leaders engage teachers in productive discussions about content knowledge, in this case mathematics? We looked specifically at their ability to engage teachers in discussions of multiple solution strategies and multiple representations. And you'll recall from Snakes and Snakewood that the teacher leader who had his teachers work on the problem in 3 different ways and create posters. So for both representations and solution strategies, we considered whether the teachers generated and discussed multiple strategies, multiple examples, whether they considered the mathematical relationships among the examples, and whether they examined the mathematical advantages and disadvantages of the various examples. And what we found in our research is teacher leaders were able, to some extent, to facilitate rich discussions. In general, they were rated more highly on the indicators of ability to have teachers generate and discuss solution strategies and representations, and less strongly on the 4 indicators that entailed analyzing and discussing relationships among representations and solution strategies. Now, you can imagine the same thing would be true of discussions in classrooms. It tends to be easier to get ideas on the table than to have people look at the relationships among ideas. Making comparisons among concepts is more cognitively complex than identifying and describing them. And again, here's quotes from two of our teacher leaders. The first one is from our interview with teacher leader, with Carla, at the end of the project. And the second one is actually from the video of Kyla leading Workshop 1. I'll let you read them. One thing to notice about Kyla's approach, it's another variation of the approach that was used in Snakes and Snakewood. Rather than asking different groups of teachers to solve it differently, they had all of the teachers solve the problem one way, and then they had all of the teachers solve the problem a different way, and then they engaged in a conversation around the strengths and limitations or affordances and constraints of the different solution strategies. What both quotes indicate is that the teacher leaders were intentional in their efforts to ensure that teachers use different representations and different solution strategies. So now let's look at pedagogical content knowledge, the extent to which the teacher leaders use strategies designed to deepen teachers' knowledge of content and students and knowledge of content and teaching. Now, given the PSC's emphasis on artifacts to situate PD in participating teachers' classrooms, we also included indicators here. We also included indicators of their skill in selecting video clips and framing the viewing and discussion of video clips. So for most workshops, the video clips that the teacher leaders selected were relevant to the teachers and appropriate with respect to the level of trust within the community. This was a really important finding for us because one of the questions that was frequently asked about the problem-solving cycle was whether teacher leaders new to this PD model would be able to select video clips that would foster rich discussions about classroom practice. And there were really two sets of concerns. One was the limited experience that a lot of people have had discussing video clips, and the other was a very limited set of video from which they could choose, basically video from the teachers in their group. And so we were glad to see that the video clips that they selected were successful in engaging the teachers in rich conversations. And this is this reminds me of the comment earlier that one of you made about 3 minutes of video, you don't have time to unpack it in an hour-long professional development. And that was one of the things that these professional development leaders were very successful in doing, is picking the kind of clips that easily could be talked about for an hour in a very rich conversation. They weren't as successful in leading discussions to foster teachers' development of knowledge of content in students and knowledge of content in teachers. During our leader support meetings, we focused primarily on selecting video and on formulating questions to launch the video-based discussions. And so our analysis suggests that they needed additional support and coaching to actually facilitate the discussions and keep a level of depth in the discussions. And for example, we realized that they needed more practice explicitly focusing on developing possible probes to guide the analysis and to explore the issues that might surface in the discussions. And that they probably also needed more rehearsals during the meeting to gain experience using the probes in the course of a discussion. And again, here are quotes from the final interviews with two of the teacher leaders. Now, Mandy was one of our strongest teacher leaders. She commented, I just think that after doing my first video workshop, I felt more comfortable and I was more prepared with the different types of questions and things to ask them to keep the focus moving in the right direction. So she had actually did some preparing in advance, coming up with possible probes to use in her planning. Jason, who was not initially as strong, said, "I think I should have sat down and thought of some better questions to ask. I had some, but in retrospect, after I replayed it in my own mind, I came up with about 4 more that I could have asked about different things."
Thanks, Hilda. I think some of those most recent comments speak a little bit to the challenges that teachers might face, teacher leaders might face as they're preparing for professional development, and the many different things they need to think about. So now we're going to turn it again to our participants and ask you all to think about, in your context, what features of the PSC do you think would be most challenging for new PD leaders? Jared mentions that the feel of being seen as evaluators could be a challenge. And that certainly speaks to the culture of the school or the district. Teachers not being confident enough. I think that, and maybe Hilda, you can speak to this as well, no matter how much professional development you deliver, there's always a certain amount of nerves associated with putting on a professional development session.
One of the things that we do with respect to that, I agree with you, and we certainly have had some teacher leaders who initially were not confident. Not so much standing before their peers, because they're really not standing and delivering professional development, but even thinking about how they could lead discussions with their peers. So one of the things that we do with video is have them think about the kinds of video that would be less threatening to anybody, that would be easier to talk about. So for example, we would, a clip of students who were solving a problem in a unique way. That's a clip that's fairly easy for teachers to talk about, and it's a low-risk situation. Whereas if you remember earlier on in the webinar, I referred to a clip where the teacher had not been happy with his questioning strategies. That was a much more potentially risk-taking kind of conversation to have. And so that's one that we would encourage them not to try to lead until they really felt comfortable with their group. So I see Patricia's asking about getting the videos. Getting the videos can be a real challenge. I can tell you some success stories and I can tell you some not so successful stories. One of the things is whether teachers are willing to be videotaped. And what we typically found is that even if teachers are not willing to be videotaped at the beginning of the problem-solving cycle, after they see how video is used, they become more comfortable and willing to do it. So that's one aspect. A second aspect is just the technology. In a recent project that we did in California, we were really committed to using technology that would be sustainable and scalable. So we tried flip cameras, and it turns out that the quality of the video was just not good enough. And in that case, the teacher leaders really did have a hard time getting videos that were decent quality. So there's both the kind of personal issues around getting video, and there's also the technology ones. I think the good news about technology is that it's improving all the time. Oh, you guys are asking some great questions. Go ahead, Elizabeth.
Let me piggyback off of that and just ask you, do you have any good suggestions for folks about alternatives, you speak about artifacts and videos being one example. Could this model translate to different types of artifacts, student work, in order to get at the same intent and reach the same objectives?
It definitely can for some of the elements that we work on. I think having written student work is definitely an artifact that can be very productive. Some of it, though, video is just so powerful that it's good to have access to video. What we've noticed, though, is that a lot of schools and districts are having more video equipment. And one approach is to not try to have all of the teachers be videotaped teaching a particular problem, and just identify one or two each time, and that way there's more of a likelihood you could have the resources to do it. Jared's saying we have an issue with mics. Either we hear only the teacher or only one group. Were we able to hear all of the groups? No. That's the simple answer to that. So we think about, we've tried a lot of different strategies. One strategy is when the students are working in small groups, if we know what we want to focus on is watching students solve problems in small groups, then we actually would use a table mic and have the camera just focused on that group. So you clearly have to make some decisions as you're collecting the artifacts, anticipating the kind of workshop that you want to lead. Patricia asked about permissions needed to videotape students. A lot of school districts now actually have blanket permissions that the students sign if the video is only going to be used for ongoing instructional purposes and professional development. In our situation for research, we did have to get permissions. We actually, in one case, had to get active permission from the students and parents. In another situation, we had to get passive consent. But in my experience, most of the time, if you're not doing a research project and you're just using it internally for professional development, it's not been a problem.
I think the last thing I want to touch on that I saw a few people mention is the relevance of the PD. And we all have been in sessions where we don't feel that the message we're hearing is really relevant to our practice. And so I think that is really a challenge in ensuring that the professional development that's being delivered is really meaningful for what teachers are going back and being expected to do in their classrooms. And that is certainly the case in the model you're describing, very student-centered and based on classroom instruction.
Yeah, I just want to piggyback onto that and add one more thing, which is if you remember back to the earlier slide about adaptive versus highly specified professional development, I think that the biggest advantage of the adaptive is the flexibility to make sure that you're being relevant. So the teacher leader would have the ability to talk with all of the teachers in the group and say, okay, let's really think about what instructional strategies do we want to work on. And one that often comes up is questioning strategies. So then the PD leader can make sure that when he or she is going through the video, selecting clips that are going to address the kind of priorities that particular school has decided upon. Or sometimes that might be done at the district level, so that the district would have as a priority, for example, in mathematics, the mathematical practices in the Common Core. So the district might highlight particular mathematical practices that are going to be the focus, and then pick problems that are particularly rich with respect to those practices, and make sure that the video clips show students engaged in various degrees of success engaged in those practices.
So it takes planning, and there are challenges associated with that we've heard throughout today's session, the planning, the time, the resources to do all of that. But despite those challenges, there's still a potential for positive impact on the teachers who are involved in PSCs. And I think you'll talk to us a little bit about that positive impact now.
Right. So I'm just going to highlight a few of our findings regarding the impact of the PSC on participating teachers. In the second project that I've been referring to, implementing the problem-solving cycle, we worked with a total of 83 teacher participants over the time. 83 teachers who attended the PSC workshops led by teacher leaders in their schools. One finding is that overall they demonstrated an increase in their mathematical knowledge for teaching. And we assessed that using an instrument that's called the Mathematical Knowledge for Teaching Assessment that was developed by Heather Hill, Deborah Ball, and colleagues. And it's one of the assessments that has been used a lot in the educational research community, and I know it's been picked up by a number of districts as well. And then we also have evidence that the PSC can impact teachers' instructional practices. Now, I'm not going to claim that we saw miracles and dramatic changes in all of the teachers' instructional practices along multiple dimensions, but I will say that over time the teachers were better able to build on their students' ideas to help them work through errors in a conceptual manner. And really, that's probably one of the areas of instructional practice that this particular district wanted to focus on. So we really spent a lot of time working with the teacher leaders to select video clips that would lead to rich conversations about students' mathematical thinking and rich conversations about instructional decisions to really build on students' mathematical thinking. So we did see the kinds of changes in instructional practice that really matched with the priorities that that district had set for change. So in sum, I want to just go back to the research questions that we started with. Remember, we had questions about the effectiveness and the scalability and the sustainability of the problem-solving cycle. And what we found is that the problem-solving cycle model was effective in improving teachers' knowledge and instructional practices, that the teacher leaders were able to adapt the PSC workshops for their own teachers and school contexts, and the PSC was successfully enacted by different teacher leaders. And the postscript to that is that after the research project was over, the math coordinator for that district, the secondary math coordinator for that district, during the project she had started to take more and more of an active role in leading some of the leadership preparation meetings. And after we, as a research team, pulled out, she has maintained using the problem-solving cycle as a method of professional development for that district. I also want to talk a little bit about lessons learned and some of the ways that, some of the things that we have started to do to improve our model for preparation of teacher leaders. So based on the findings and conclusions, we've been refining our model, and we decided to first focus on video-based discussions since that's one of the things that's most unique about the project. And in particular, in the support meetings, we're being more explicit in helping the teacher leaders plan for the workshops that they'll be conducting and also orchestrating. So with respect to planning, we're now much more explicit in helping the teacher leaders identify the content and also the pedagogical goals of the video clips. So what do they want the conversation to be about? And then secondly, as they're selecting the video clips, also identify features of the video clips that they want to make sure that the teachers notice. So not just selecting clips, but saying, what are the things we really want the teachers to notice in this video and to talk about? And then crafting questions to guide the discussion, both launching questions and also what we call back pocket questions, the kind of questions that they can pull out if teachers haven't noticed the things that they're hoping to bring out. And then with respect to orchestrating, one of the things that's been very key is this idea of rehearsal. So we've come to use more and more the notion of once you've planned for a discussion, let's rehearse it with the peers in the group. Rehearse ways of eliciting teacher thinking, rehearse ways of probing for evidence of teachers' claims and attention to critical features of the video, and rehearse helping the group to connect their analysis to the key content ideas and pedagogical ideas. So I guess the theme is that their planning has become more explicit, and also the rehearsals of the practices. And I want to again just highlight that although we've been focusing on mathematics, I think that these kinds of preparation of teacher leaders are not unique to mathematics. They're just as relevant to PD and other content areas when video of classrooms is used as a springboard for discussion. And now I'm going to turn it back over to Elizabeth.
Thanks, Hilda. You know, the purpose of today's webinar was not only to hear about this wonderful project that Hilda's been involved in, but to really internalize some of the things that she's spoken about and to think about how that can impact your own practice. And in the work you do, think about some action steps that you might want to take as a result of what you've heard today. So now I'd like you to reflect a little bit and think about the many different things you've heard and maybe consider one thing that you can walk away from today with and try to use in your own practice. So again, you'll see a pop-up box, and we'd like you to share because I think that we'll get a lot of benefit out of seeing the ideas that others are coming up with about how they'll take this information out into the field. Looks like Catherine's going to take it right up to the superintendent to create a similar program. That's amazing. Diana, I know she works with career and tech teachers and giving them the opportunity to see what that teaching looks like and using video as an approach for that. Sounds like Jared has done some of this work and has gotten some good ideas for planning. I like the idea of capacity building. I think that, you know, as teacher leaders become better at their practice and deliver this professional development model to teachers, then teachers get better at doing it themselves, and we start to build a cadre of teachers who are all able to deliver professional development and then deliver quality instruction to their students.
I want to just piggyback on that, Elizabeth. That's something that we really noticed in the work in Colorado, this notion of building capacity and really creating a cadre of teachers who are teacher leaders. And in fact, I know that the math coordinator in that district has actually started rotating teacher leaders now because there's really a very nice cadre of people who have developed the capacity to lead the PD workshops.
And I think that has a lot of benefits across the board because not only is it building people's individual capacity, but it's allowing for those who are receiving the professional development to see different folks and see different styles and to really experience a wide range of professional development experiences.
Absolutely, I agree. And different people will notice different things as they watch videos, so they'll be able to bring more variety in terms of the kinds of topics that are talked about.
I like what Elise mentions about making sure the video doesn't end the sessions, that, it's a component, but, the discussions need to continue, and bringing in a lot of different elements will make the professional learning experience really rich for teachers.
Right. We consider video to be the springboard for discussion. So it's the starting point.
And as a former, after formerly working in teacher preparation, I like Barbara's comment about inviting teaching interns into this process. So you're working with those novice teachers and really getting them engaged in the professional learning practices of the school or the district, so that, from the get-go, they're really engaged and involved in this work, and will have a leg up when they take on their own classroom.
So Patricia's idea is an interesting one, starting with teaching videos of others and then moving toward confidence in using your own. That's actually something that we have tried, and then we found that you sometimes get into this issue of relevance, that teachers don't necessarily see videos of others as relevant. So what we have found, at least in our work, to be a little bit more successful is to start with videos that don't include the teacher, to start with videos that are really focused on the students and what the students are doing, and then bring in video of teachers as they become more comfortable with the process and with the community.
I think the question Jared asks is one we saw quite a few people ask in the registration process, the questions that came in ahead of today's webinar. People are really interested in hearing, and I'll ask you to speak a little bit about this, Hilda. What tools did you use, and you spoke a bit about it, but maybe you can expand, to assess the effectiveness of this model? And, what do you suggest for people to do in their own practice to really assess how effective their professional development is?
Yeah, so let me talk a little bit about that. One of the commitments that our project made early on was not to be in the business of creating assessment tools. So we made the decision to use existing tools, and in particular we use the mathematical knowledge for teaching and the mathematical quality of instruction tools. The first being paper pencil, actually it's now online, survey of knowledge, and the second one being an approach to assessing, evaluating observations of classrooms. Both of those were developed by Heather Hill at Harvard and Deborah Ball at Michigan, and versions of them are publicly available, so you could look for either of their names and at the University of Michigan or at Harvard, and it may take you a little bit of time, but you can wind your way to that website. Maybe we can also try to get some of that information in the responses that we provide after the webinar. Does that make sense, Elizabeth?
Yeah, I was just going to suggest that. We have a set of question and answers that we'll be posting to our website, and we'll certainly include some of those resources there for you all.
And I would say another thing is the MET study, the Measuring Effective Teaching study that was funded by Gates. The MQI was one of the measures that they used, and that's another website that you can go to and see how to get access. So we can put that up as well. One of the instruments that we haven't used, but I know other people have used, is Charlotte Danielson's framework, which is not content specific. It's more of a content generic one. In terms of looking at the effectiveness of the actual professional development, we started with the Professional Development Observation Protocol, which was developed by Horizon Incorporated, and again, we can put up the reference to that. We found that one to be a bit overwhelming and ended up just using parts of it. And you'll recognize some of those parts in the indicators of like workshop culture and teacher knowledge and pedagogical knowledge and content knowledge.
I think this has been great to hear what folks are planning to do once they finish today's session and really make this work real for their practice. So we do appreciate everyone sharing their plans with us. We're going to move on to the next slide, and Hilda's going to just briefly wrap up.
So I'll mention a caveat, though, with this, which is, so we have a website, which you see on this slide, psc.stanford.edu. Unfortunately, it's not as up-to-date as we would like it to be, so you will be able to get some information off of it and not other information. One of the things that you can get from it is the kinds of mathematical tasks that we have used and some of the papers that we've given.
Great. And I hope people will take some time to explore that, and of course the additional resources that we plan to provide will be a great place to start. Now we have about 15 minutes or so left to engage in some more question and answer. I know that people were asking questions throughout, which was wonderful, but we'll put another pop-up box up there and allow people to shoot your questions out, and Hilda will be able to respond to those. So as folks are typing, you'll notice that you only see your own question in this portion. So we'll be seeing all the questions, and anything that we don't have the opportunity to attend to at this time, we'll make sure that we address during the Q&A document that will go onto the website. Diana is asking about the PowerPoint and audio. Absolutely. All of our sessions that we're doing in this series, you'll see down in the bottom the resources box. The professional development PowerPoint is there. You can just click on that, and it will give you the opportunity to download today's PowerPoint. And you'll also receive an email in the next day or so, maybe it'll be early next week, that thanks you for attending today's event and gives you the link to where the resources will be listed. And the resources will include the question and answers and the video archive.
Now, one thing I'll point out in response to Diana's question, you'll notice that one of the PowerPoint slides does not have the photo of the students working in a small group, and that does have to do with that issue of student and parent consent, that we have consent for the research project to use it in presentations that we give, but not to put it on websites that are available publicly.
Hilda, I have a question that came in, and this relates to providing training to large groups of teachers. We know that in your model, you focused on relatively small groups of training for professional development, and we know that in many districts, there's the need to deliver professional development to large groups of teachers. And can you talk to us about how folks can design active trainings that engage large groups?
You know, I think that's like, it's a little bit parallel to how do you at a university actively involve students when you have a large lecture type class. And I think that, you know, one way of doing it is the way that we did this webinar where You can ask for people to ask questions and pause. I think another way that can be more effective is to, during the course of the large group professional development, break into small groups and have people do some of the work in small groups and make sure that they're really talking with one another in their small groups. I know I've done workshops on the mathematical problems with fairly large groups, and we just have people sitting at tables and talking with one another, and we rotate and try to hit all of the groups and push people thinking, raise questions, and then have an overall discussion at the end. I've done that with video, but not with video from the actual teachers in the group.
I think, too, it would be a good opportunity to use, if you have a cadre of teacher leaders, to break into those small groups and really build that capacity for people to lead segments of the larger group.
Absolutely.
I have another question from someone asking about the follow-up to professional development, and we all know that we've heard it cannot be, isolated, and we need to make this sustainable, and we need to make this all part of a comprehensive professional learning experience. But the question relates to coaching, and how essential is the coaching process to effective practice and improved professional learning?
I think that in any situation you make a decision about resource allocation, because we're always dealing with limited resources. And in our work, we've chosen not to use a coaching model. We've chosen that the limited time that the PD leader has is spent preparing to lead workshops and actually leading the workshops. So that's just a decision that we made. It's not to say that coaching is better or worse. It's just a different model.
Okay, and I noticed that there's someone in our audience today who's an alternate route teacher, and she's mentioning that these webinars have been really helpful. And Catherine, we appreciate that, and we're happy you've been joining us, and we want you to get the most out of these sessions. So for everyone, make sure that you provide us your feedback in the survey at the end of the session, and that will really help us to ensure that these sessions are meeting your needs and continue to touch on topics that will relate closely to your practice. So that's one way you can help us out. Hilda, another person is asking about portfolios, and how would you use portfolios in the evaluation of professional development? So I'm thinking more in the evaluation of teachers this might relate to, and how would a teacher's portfolio be used?
So I think that depends on what you're including in the teacher's portfolio. So one thing that's often included in portfolios is video of instructional practice. Video, like I know in the National Board Certification portfolios, teachers include a video and then they reflect on the video. So you could imagine teachers including a video clip and then reflecting on the video clip with the same kinds of questions and unpacking that they would do in the professional development. That would be one example that I can think of. Or similarly, doing the same thing with samples of student work.
That's great. Another question, and this is on everyone's mind right now, we're making this big transition to Common Core, and we all know that the consortia are developing the assessments that are going to complement the Common Core, and all states are involved in one, if not both, of these consortia. And someone's asking about what type of specific professional development will ensure that teachers are prepared for those assessments. the PARCC and the SBAC tests that are going to come down the line?
That's a really good question, and I know that it really is on everyone's mind. One of the interesting things about the Common Core, at least with the math practices, is that the math practices are written so broadly that there are a number of people around the country now trying to really operationalize them and ask the question, okay, what would this math practice look like in a classroom? And I think once we have a better handle on that, it's easy to see how the professional development can be used to improve students' mathematical practices. One example would be how you select the video and what you encourage teachers to discuss, to notice in the video and to discuss in the video. Another in mathematics is to pick the kind of rich tasks for the problem-solving cycle that are the kinds of tasks that are going to demand or foster students' engagement in the mathematical practices. I think all of the problems that we've selected, the Common Core didn't exist when we were selecting them, but they are all the kinds of problems that you could see engaging students in the mathematical practices. I guess the other thing is that there's a number of websites that are coming up that have in mathematics rich tasks. And those are the kinds of tasks that could easily be brought into the problem-solving cycle. You know, making choices based on the particular content strand that you want to emphasize in your work.
That's really helpful. I'm sure folks are gearing up for that professional development that will accompany the new tests, and again, to try to make that meaningful and ensure that it complements the instructional process is going to be a challenge, but it's good that people are thinking about that.
You know, I think it's a challenge, and I also, you know, in my optimistic self says that because everybody's paying attention to the Common Core, there will be more opportunities for professional development, that states and districts and schools will realize the importance of professional development and help to really create the structures within which that can happen.
So now I'm going to just wrap up our session today. I'm going to touch on a few of the major themes that we discussed. We heard a lot about the research and the need for high quality and effective professional development for teachers and how that's part of a comprehensive approach to educational reform. We heard about the problem-solving cycle as one approach to mathematics PD. We know it's highly adaptive and it allows for PD to be designed and delivered with the local context in mind. I think that's really important for folks today to take away, that this is not designed for one particular type of school or type of district. It can work in any context because it's flexible in content and it's flexible in the way that it's delivered. We heard that the PSC involves 3 distinct phases, with Workshop 1 focusing on completing student tasks and developing plans for using the tasks in classrooms, Workshop 2 focusing on using the artifacts like the videos, and some written work to get a deeper understanding of students' thinking and reasoning. And we heard that Workshop 3 focuses on really dissecting the instructional practices of teachers as they deliver their problem-based lessons. The PD model also accounts for the development of leaders and learning how to deliver this PSC model so that it can be ongoing and sustainable. And it's a capacity building endeavor, both building teachers up as PD leaders and simultaneously increasing their knowledge and teaching skills. And this is a year-long model, so it takes time, but it's time that's invested in teaching strategies and a process and taking that time to plan and reflect and deliver the professional development. We heard a bit about the impact of this model, and we heard that teacher leaders were able to establish productive cultures for collaborative and effective professional development, that teacher leaders were really able to help their teachers develop content knowledge and really deepen their own pedagogical content knowledge, and where those intersect, helping their students the knowledge that their students are gaining improve. And the overall impact of the project demonstrated that the PSC was really effective in improving teachers' knowledge of and instructional practices. The teacher leaders were really able to adapt this model to their own local context, and the PSC was sustained by several teacher leaders beyond the project. Hilda also shared some great ways that researchers have refined the model to guide PD leaders in planning and delivery of this video-based PD. And there's so many elements that we heard that many people are going to be taking away from today's session. So we're really pleased to see that application already starting because you're thinking about that. So it's been wonderful to have this time with Dr. Borko today and to hear her firsthand experiences with this research she's done over a decade, and communicate with us about today's event. You'll see our email addresses on the screen.